They said looking into Dante Moretti's eyes was a death sentence, but looking at his dogs? That was an immediate execution. Brutus and Nero were 200 pounds of pure, muscle-bound rage, trained killers that no one, not even Dante's own handlers, could touch without bleeding. The entire underworld trembled when those chains rattled. But on a rainy Tuesday, in a room full of armed hitmen, paralyzed by fear, a trembling waitress didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply made one small, silent hand gesture. And what the beasts did next brought the most dangerous man in the city to his knees. The Velvet Room wasn't just a restaurant. It was a neutral ground for the city's most ruthless predators. It smelled of expensive scotch, Cuban cigars, and fear. Sarah Jenkins, a 23-year-old waitress with frayed shoelaces and a mountain of student debt, tried to make herself invisible as she balanced a tray of crystal tumblers. She knew the rules: eyes down, mouth shut, and never, ever interrupt the men at the corner booth. Tonight, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The air conditioning was humming, but sweat beaded on the forehead of the floor manager, Mr. Henderson. The reason for the anxiety had just pulled up to the curb in a matte black convoy: Dante Moretti, the capo of the East Coast. He didn't walk in alone. Before Dante even crossed the threshold, the heavy double doors were pushed open by two massive bodyguards struggling to hold back leashes made of thick industrial chain. "Clear the path!" one guard shouted, his voice cracking. Brutus and Nero surged into the room. They were cane corsos, specifically bred for war, black brindle coats, cropped ears, and eyes that burned with a chaotic violence. They weren't just barking, they were screaming, a guttural wet sound that made the hair on Sarah's arm stand up. A patron at table 4 dropped his fork. The clang echoed like a gunshot. Brutus snapped his head toward the noise, dragging the 200-pound guard across the polished marble floor. "Hold him back!" Henderson shrieked, diving behind the host stand. Dante walked in behind the chaos, looking bored. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit, completely unbothered by the fact that his pets were seconds away from mauling a terrified accountant at table 4. Dante was handsome in a way that hurt to look at. Sharp jawline, cold grey eyes, and an aura of absolute authority. He viewed the violence as a mild inconvenience. "Sit," Dante commanded. His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it carried weight. The dogs ignored him. They were overstimulated, agitated by the scent of strangers and fear. Nero lunged at a passing busboy, snapping his jaws inches from the kid's hip. The busboy scrambled back, knocking over a stand of wine bottles. Crash. Red wine pooled on the floor like blood. The scent of alcohol hit the dogs, and they went berserk. The handlers were losing their grip. The chains were slipping. Sarah was trapped. She was standing right between the kitchen doors and the wine spill, her tray clutched to her chest. She saw the handler's grip fail. The chain slipped through his sweaty palms. Nero was loose. The room gasped as one. The massive dog didn't go for the busboy. He spun around, confused and aggressive, looking for the source of the chaos. He locked eyes with Sarah. She froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to scream, to throw the tray, but Sarah knew dogs. She knew them better than she knew people. She saw something in Nero's eyes that no one else saw. It wasn't just bloodlust, it was panic. The dog was terrified of the noise, the slick floor, the screaming men. Dante reached for the gun inside his jacket, ready to put his own prize dog down before it killed a civilian. "Don't move," Dante warned her, raising the weapon. But Sarah moved. She didn't run away. She didn't step back. Slowly, with a fluidity that defied the adrenaline coursing through her veins, she lowered herself to the floor. She ignored the spilled wine soaking into her cheap uniform. She ignored Dante's gun. She placed the tray down silently and extended her right hand, palm open, facing upward. But she didn't reach for the dog. She placed her hand flat on the wine-stained floor, knuckles down, palm up, the universal sign of total submission. Then she lowered her head, exposing her neck, and closed her eyes. "What is she doing? She has a death wish," Henderson whispered harshly. The room went deathly silent. Nero stopped his charge. The dog stood 3 feet from her, panting heavily, slobbering thick strings of saliva onto the marble. He looked at the vulnerable neck exposed to him. In the wild, this was an override code. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't fleeing. She was yielding. Nero took a step forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest, vibrating through the floorboards against Sarah's knees. Sarah didn't flinch. She let out a long, slow exhale, a specific sound, almost a huff. "Hoo!" Nero tilted his massive, blocky head. He took another step. He sniffed her hand, then her hair. The scent of cheap vanilla shampoo and fear seemed to ground him. The aggression evaporated from his posture, the bristling fur along his spine smoothed down. To the shock of every criminal, killer, and thief in the room, the monster let out a whine. Nero sat down heavily in the puddle of wine, leaned forward, and licked the side of Sarah's face. Sarah opened her eyes, and slowly, carefully, scratched the spot behind Nero's ear. "Good boy," she whispered. A slow clap broke the silence. Sarah looked up. Dante Moretti was standing directly over her, his gun holstered, looking at her as if she were a ghost. "Get up," Dante said. It wasn't a request. Sarah's legs were shaking so badly she almost slipped on the wine as she stood up. Nero, however, didn't want her to move. The massive dog leaned his entire weight against her thigh, pressing her against the wall. He had claimed her. I'm sorry, sir," Sarah stammered, wiping dog saliva from her cheek. "I didn't mean to interfere. I just saw he was scared." Dante narrowed his eyes. "Scared? That dog has ripped the throat out of a trained assassin. He doesn't get scared." "He was slipping on the floor," Sarah said, her voice gaining a tiny fraction of strength. "The noise, the smell of the alcohol. He felt cornered. Aggression is usually just fear with teeth." Dante studied her. He looked at her name tag, which was crooked. "Sarah, leave us," Dante ordered the room. "Sir, we have reservations," Henderson started. "I said leave us," Dante repeated, his voice dropping an octave. Within 60 seconds, the restaurant cleared out. The patrons, the staff, even Henderson scurried out the back or front exits. The only people left were Dante, his 2 incompetent handlers, his 3 armed guards, and Sora. Dante sat down at the nearest table. "Sit, Sarah." She hesitated. Nero nudged her leg with his wet nose. She sat. "Brutus," Dante called to the other dog, who was still straining against the second handler's leash. "Let him go!" The handler looked terrified. "Boss, if I let him go—" "Let him go!" The handler unclipped the chain. Brutus, seeing his brother calm, trotted over. He sniffed Sarah's shoes, then sniffed Nero. Sarah didn't stiffen. She kept her hands on her lap, open and relaxed. Brutus sniffed her hand and then flopped down at her feet, resting his heavy chin on her sneaker. Dante poured himself a glass of water from the carafe on the table. He took a sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. The silence stretched for an agonizing minute. "Who do you work for?" Dante asked suddenly. "The Velvet Room," Sarah said, confused. "Mr. Henderson is my manager." "No," Dante leaned forward. "Who sent you? Who taught you how to handle cane corsos trained in Sicily? These aren't golden retrievers, cara mia. These dogs are weaponized. The only people who can get this close to them are either dead or family. I grew up in a trailer park in broken-down Arizona, Sarah said, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She hated talking about her past. My dad, he ran a dog-fighting ring in the backyard. I didn't participate. I was the one who stitched them up after. I was the one who fed them when they were too hurt to fight. I learned how to not get bit, because if I got bit, I got hit. The raw honesty of the statement hung in the air. Dante's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Respect? Or perhaps suspicion? You have a debt, Dante stated. He wasn't asking. He was looking at her worn-out shoes, her tired eyes, the way she flinched when he moved his hand too fast. Student loans? Medical bills? My brother, Sarah whispered. He's in trouble. I'm paying off his mistakes. Dante reached into his jacket pocket, the guards tense, thinking he was going for a weapon again. Instead, he pulled out a thick envelope of cash he had brought for the poker game that was no longer happening. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. That's $10,000, Dante said. Take it. Sarah stared at the money. It was more than she made in 6 months. I can't take that. I didn't do anything. You saved my dog, Dante said, his voice hardening. If Nero had bitten that busboy, I would have had to put him down. I have enemies everywhere, Sarah. A dog that bites civilians is a liability. You saved his life. Take the money. Sarah reached out, her hand trembling. As her fingers brushed the envelope, Brutus growled. Not at her. He growled at the door. Dante froze. The handlers froze. The front door of the restaurant, which had been locked by the guards, clicked. The lock was being picked. Get down, Dante roared. He flipped the table, grabbing Sarah by the arm and dragging her behind the heavy mahogany bar, just as the front windows shattered. Crash! Gunfire erupted. Automatic rounds shredded the upholstery where Sarah had been sitting seconds ago. The peaceful moment was obliterated. Stay down! Dante pressed his hand on her shoulder, pushing her flat against the dirty floor behind the bar. Brutus and Nero didn't cower this time. The gunfire was familiar to them. They were barking. Deep, rhythmic barks that signaled they were ready to kill. My men are outside. How did they get past? Dante hissed into his radio, but there was only static. We're compromised. He looked at Sarah. She was curled in a ball, her hands over her ears, shaking, but she wasn't screaming. She was looking at the dogs. Nero, Brutus, heel! Dante shouted, trying to keep the dogs from charging into the kill zone. They hesitated, their instincts warring with their training. They won't listen with the noise, Sarah yelled over the sound of shattering glass. You have to anchor them. What? Dante snapped, firing 2 shots over the bar toward the entrance. They need an anchor. Sarah scrambled forward, grabbing a heavy bag of ice from the open cooler. She whistled, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the gunfire. Both dogs whipped their heads around. Sarah slammed the bag of ice onto the floor next to Dante. Here, place, she commanded, pointing to the spot next to the boss. Miraculously, the dogs scrambled behind the bar, pressing their bodies against Dante and Sarah, creating a living wall of muscle. Dante looked at her, breathless. He reloaded his clip. If we get out of this alive, Sarah, he shouted over the roar of a shotgun blast, taking out the top shelf of liquor. You're quitting this job. And doing what? She yelled back. Working for me, Dante said, firing back. You're the only one who can control the damn dogs, and apparently I'm going to need them tonight. A grenade rolled across the floor of the dining room. Move! Dante covered her body with his own as the explosion rocked the building, plunging them into darkness. The ringing in Sarah's ears was deafening, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the world. She coughed, the taste of drywall dust and acrid smoke coating her tongue. Something heavy was pressing her into the wet floorboards behind the bar. It was Dante. He wasn't moving. "Mr. Moretti?" she rasped, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. The dogs were whining. It was a frantic, high-pitched sound that cut through the tinnitus. Sarah pushed against Dante's chest. He groaned, a low, pained sound, and rolled off her. The movement revealed a jagged shard of glass, easily 4 inches long, embedded deep in his left shoulder, soaking his grey suit jacket in a terrifyingly dark shade of crimson. "The dogs!" Dante gritted out, his eyes squeezed shut. "Control them." Sarah looked up. The explosion had blown out the front facade of the velvet room. Through the smoke, she could see shadows moving, men with rifles stepping over the debris. They were coming to finish the job. Brutus and Nero were pacing frantically in the small space behind the bar, their nails clicking on the broken glass. Their hackles were raised, lips curled back to reveal teeth that could snap bone. They were in a red zone state, ready to kill anything that moved, including Dante or Sarah if they were startled. Sarah forced herself to breathe. She couldn't panic. If she panicked, the dogs would attack. "Hey," she whispered, not to Dante, but to the beasts. She made a sharp tisk sound. Both heads snapped toward her. She held up a single finger. "Wait." It was a command she used on the strays back in Arizona. It meant focus. "We have to move," Dante hissed, struggling to sit up. He was pale, sweating profusely. "Back exit, my driver. Heavily armored SUV in the alley." "Can you walk?" Sarah asked, grabbing a bar towel and pressing it firmly around the glass in his shoulder. Dante let out a sharp curse, but nodded. "Help me up." Sarah hooked her arm under his good side. He was heavy, a wall of muscle, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. As they stood, the shadows in the smoke drew closer. "Check the bodies," a voice shouted from the dining room. "Find Moretti." "Heel," Sarah commanded the dogs, snapping her fingers against her thigh. To Dante's disbelief, the 200-pound monsters flanked them perfectly, pressing close to their legs as they stumbled toward the kitchen swing doors. They weren't pulling on the invisible leashes, they were escorting. They burst into the kitchen. The stainless steel prep tables were overturned. The chefs had fled long ago. Sarah kicked the back door open, leading them into the torrential rain of the alleyway. A black Cadillac Escalade was idling there, its passenger side door riddled with bullet holes, but the glass intact. The driver, a man with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow, jumped out, gun drawn. "Boss!" the driver yelled. "Luca, drive!" Dante roared, stumbling as his knees gave out. Sarah caught him, but she was slipping on the wet pavement. Nero barked, a thunderous sound that made Luca flinch and point his gun at the dog. "Don't!" Sarah screamed, shielding the dog with her body. "He's protecting us!" "Get them in the car!" Dante ordered, coughing blood. It was a chaotic tangle of limbs and wet fur. Sarah shoved Brutus into the back seat, then Nero. She helped shove Dante in next to them, and she scrambled in last, slamming the heavy armored door, just as gunfire erupted at the alley entrance. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the reinforced steel body of the car. Luca floored the gas. The SUV screeched out of the alley, fishtailing on the wet asphalt, before gripping the road and tearing off into the night. Inside the car, it was a pressure cooker. The air smelled of copper blood, wet dog, and fear. Dante was slumped against the window, his breathing shallow. The dogs were agitated by the speed and the smell of their master's blood. Nero began to growl low in his throat, eyeing Luca in the driver's seat. "The dog is going to bite my head off, boss," Luca shouted, glancing in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide with panic. "No, he isn't," Sarah said firmly. She sat in the middle seat, squeezed between the two massive animals. She reached out with both hands, burying her fingers into the thick fur of their necks. She began to massage the pressure points behind their ears, a technique she'd learned from her father to calm fighting dogs coming down from an adrenaline high. "Easy," she murmured, keeping her breathing rhythmic and slow. "Easy, boys. We're safe. We're safe." The effect was hypnotic. The rhythmic motion of the car combined with Sarah's touch began to sedate them. Nero rested his heavy head on Sarah's lap, drooling onto her apron. Brutus leaned against Dante's uninjured side, whining softly. Dante turned his head, his eyes half open, watching her. He was losing blood fast, his skin turning a waxy grey. "You," Dante whispered, his voice slurring. "Who are you?" "Just a waitress," Sarah said, her voice trembling now that the immediate threat was over. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in Dante's blood. "Not anymore," Dante murmured. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward. "He's out!" Sarah screamed. "Drive faster!" The SUV tore through the city limits, heading toward the hills where the lights of the city faded into the darkness of the private estates. They weren't going to a hospital. They were going to the fortress. The Moretti estate wasn't a house, it was a compound. High stone walls topped with electrified fencing, cameras swiveling on every corner, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter with German shepherds. But when the SUV screeched to a halt in the circular driveway, the German shepherds cowered. They smelled the apex predators in the back seat. The back doors were ripped open by a medical team. "Stabilize him! Get him to the trauma wing!" Sarah was shoved aside. She stood on the wet gravel, shivering in the rain, watching as they pulled Dante onto a stretcher. He looked dead. The invincible king of the underworld looked like a broken doll. "Secure the dogs!" a guard shouted, reaching for Brutus's collar. Snap! Brutus lunged, his jaws snapping inches from the guard's hand. The guard stumbled back, reaching for his taser. "Don't touch them!" Sarah yelled, stepping in front of the dogs again. "They don't know you. You'll get killed." Luca, the driver, stepped out of the SUV. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Stand down," he ordered the guards. He looked at Sarah with a newfound, albeit grudging, respect. "Let her handle them. She's the only reason I still have a throat." "Where do I take them?" Sarah asked, soaked to the bone, her waitress uniform clinging to her skin. "The kennels are by the east wing," Luca said, pointing. "But these two, they usually sleep in the boss's room." "Take them there," a new voice commanded. Sarah turned. Standing under the portico was an older woman, elegant and severe, wearing a silk dressing gown that probably cost more than Sarah's entire life earnings. This was Vittoria Moretti, Dante's mother. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. She was a woman who had buried a husband and feared burying a son. "If my son dies," Vittoria said coldly, looking at Sarah, "you will explain to me why you are alive and he is not. But for now, get those beasts out of the rain." 3 hours later, Sarah sat on the edge of a velvet armchair in a library that was larger than the trailer she grew up in. She had been given a change of clothes, a pair of cashmere sweatpants, and an oversized t-shirt that smelled like sandalwood. Dante's smell. The dogs were asleep on a Persian rug by the fireplace. They had refused to eat until Sarah tasted the food first. The double doors opened, and Luca walked in. He looked tired. "He's out of surgery," Luca said. "He's going to live." The glass missed the artery by 2 millimeters. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Can I go home now? My brother. He'll be worried." Luca laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Home? Sarah, you're a witness to an assassination attempt on a capo. You saw faces. You know the location of the safe house. You aren't going anywhere." "Am I a prisoner?" Sarah stood up, panic rising in her chest. "You're a guest," Luca corrected. "For your own safety. If we let you go, The people who tried to kill Dante tonight will find you. They'll torture you to find out what you know, and then they'll kill you." The reality of the situation crashed down on her. She had just wanted to pay her rent. She had just wanted to keep her head down. "Dante wants to see you," Luca added. "Now. He just had surgery. He's awake, and he's stubborn. Come." Sarah followed Luca through the winding corridors of the mansion. The walls were lined with oil paintings of severe-looking men, Dante's ancestors. They arrived at a set of double oak doors guarded by 2 men with submachine guns. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Dante was propped up in a massive 4-poster bed, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, an IV line running into his right arm. He looked paler than before, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "Leave us," Dante rasped. Luca hesitated. "Boss, you need rest." "Out." Luca bowed his head and left, closing the door. Sarah stood at the foot of the bed, feeling incredibly small. "I'm glad you're okay, Mr. Moretti." "Dante," he corrected. He gestured to the chair beside the bed. "Sit." She sat. "You handled the dogs in the car," Dante said. "I was fading, but I saw it. I've paid top trainers from Germany, from Russia. None of them could touch Nero when he's in a mood. You calmed him with a touch." "It's about respect," Sarah said quietly. "Most people try to dominate them. You can't dominate a creature that knows it can kill you. You have to partner with it." Dante studied her face. "I looked into you, Sarah Jenkins, while the doctors were stitching me up. I know about your father. I know about the debts." Sarah stiffened. "That's private." "Nothing is private," Dante said. "You owe $40,000 to a loan shark named Vinny the Snake for your brother's gambling addiction. Vinny is a low-level earner for the Rossi family. My rivals." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Please, don't hurt Toby. He's stupid, but he's not bad." "I bought the debt," Dante said casually. "What?" "I made a call. I bought your debt. You don't owe Vinny anything anymore. You owe me." Sarah's hands curled into fists. "I can't pay you $40,000. I make minimum wage plus tips." "I don't want your money," Dante said. He shifted, wincing as the pain flared in his shoulder. "I want your talent." "My talent?" "My security team is compromised," Dante revealed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Someone on the inside gave up my location tonight. I can't trust my men. I can't trust my drivers. The only things in this house I trust absolutely are Brutus and Nero. But they are useless if they are uncontrolled." Dante looked her dead in the eye. "I'm offering you a job. You will be the personal handler for the dogs. You will live here. You will feed them, train them, and ensure that when I need them to rip someone's throat out, they do it on command. And in exchange, the debt is wiped clean. I'll pay you $5,000 a week, and your brother stays breathing." It was a deal with the devil. Sarah knew that. If she said yes, she was entering a world of violence and blood. If she said no, she walked out that door, and Vinny or Dante would come for her brother. "I have conditions," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. Dante raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating? If I live here, the dogs sleep in my room, not yours. They need to bond with me if you want me to control them. And secondly, no one hurts my brother. Ever. You protect him." Dante held her gaze for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. Finally, a corner of his mouth twitched upward. "Done," Dante said. He reached out his good hand. Sarah hesitated, then took it. His skin was rough, hot to the touch. "Welcome to the family, Sarah," he whispered. Just then, A commotion erupted outside the bedroom door. "You can't go in there," Luca's voice yelled. "Get out of my way, you incompetents!" A shrill female voice screamed. The doors burst open. A woman stormed in. She was stunning, tall, blonde, wearing a red dress that looked like it was painted on. She looked like a movie star, but her eyes were filled with venom. This was Sophia, Dante's ex-fiancée, and the daughter of the rival Don. "Oh, thank God!" Sophia cried, rushing to the bed and ignoring Sarah completely. She threw herself onto the mattress, sobbing theatrically. "Dante, I heard about the explosion. I thought I lost you." Dante winced as the bed shook. "Sophia, careful." Sophia looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. Then her eyes landed on Sarah. Her expression shifted instantly from grief to disgust. "Who is this?" Sophia sneered, looking at Sarah's oversized t-shirt. "Did the maid forget to leave?" "This is Sarah," Dante said, his voice void of warmth. "She lives here now." Sophia's eyes narrowed into slits. She stood up, walking slowly toward Sarah. She looked her up and down, smelling the poverty on her. "Lives here?" Sophia laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. "As what? A pet?" "As the only person in this room who saved my life tonight," Dante said. Sophia's face darkened. She stepped closer to Sarah, invading her personal space. She leaned in, her voice a hiss only Sarah could hear. "I don't know what game you're playing, little waitress," Sophia whispered. "But Dante is mine. And if you think you can take my place, because you know a few dog tricks, I will feed you to those beasts myself." Sarah didn't back down. She had faced Pitbulls with locking jaws. A woman in a red dress didn't scare her. "The dogs only eat high-quality meat," Sarah said calmly. "I think you're safe." Dante choked on a laugh that turned into a cough. Sophia gasped, her face turning crimson with rage. "Get out, Sophia," Dante ordered. "I'm tired." Sophia stomped out, slamming the door so hard the paintings rattled. Dante looked at Sarah, a strange light in his eyes. "You have a sharp tongue. Careful you don't cut yourself with it." "I'll try not to," Sarah said. But as she walked back to the room she had been assigned, checking on the sleeping dogs, Sarah felt a knot of dread in her stomach. She had made a powerful enemy in Sophia. And in the shadows of the hallway, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The door to the security room was slightly ajar. Inside, she saw Luca speaking into a burner phone. He wasn't speaking English. He was speaking Russian. And on the floor next to him was a dog treat, the same specific, expensive brand of organic treats she had seen in Dante's pocket earlier. Sarah backed away silently. The traitor wasn't just a random guard, the rot was at the head, and she was trapped right in the middle of it. 2 weeks into her stay at the Moretti estate, Sarah realized that silence was louder than gunfire. She had spent every waking hour with Brutus and Nero. They were no longer the chaotic monsters that had torn up the velvet room. They were precision instruments. She had switched their diet to raw venison and bone marrow, cleared the infection in Brutus's left ear, and established a hierarchy. She was the alpha. Dante was the pack leader. Everyone else was prey. It was a Tuesday morning when Dante finally came down to the training grounds, a converted tennis court surrounded by 12-foot fences. His shoulder was still in a sling, but he wore his suit like armor. "Make them attack," Dante ordered, standing safely behind the chain-link gate. Sarah stood in the center of the court, 50 feet away from a padded training dummy set up on a post. Brutus and Nero sat at her heels, statue still, their muscles coiling under their sleek black coats. "They aren't circus animals, Dante," Sarah called back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "They attack on threat, not on whim." "Create the threat," he replied coldly. "I need to know they work." Sarah sighed. She looked at the dummy. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a clicker. She slapped her thigh. Fuss! Bite. The explosion of speed was terrifying. In under 3 seconds, Brutus had cleared the distance, launching himself 6 feet into the air and clamping his jaws onto the dummy's throat area. The impact shook the steel post set in concrete. Nero went low, tearing at the dummy's legs, shredding the heavy canvas like tissue paper. Dante watched, impassive. Now stop them! This was the hard part. The bloodlust was high. Aus! Out! Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. Both dogs froze. Their jaws were still locked on the fabric, their bodies vibrating with the urge to tear. But they didn't move. They waited. Heel. They released simultaneously, turning and trotting back to Sarah, sitting by her side as if they hadn't just simulated a murder. Dante opened the gate and walked in. Sarah tensed. The dogs tensed. Good, Dante said, stopping a foot from her. He smelled of espresso and expensive cologne. Tonight we have guests. The Volkov brothers are coming from Moscow. It's a peace treaty dinner. I want the dogs in the room. Is that safe? Sarah asked. Strangers, food, high tension. That's the point, Dante said, his grey eyes locking onto hers. I want Volkov to know that if he reaches for a fork the wrong way, he loses a hand. You'll be serving. I'm a handler, not a waitress anymore, she countered. Tonight you are both. Wear the black dress Vittoria bought you. And Sarah? He leaned in close, his breath ghosting over her ear. Watch Luca. Sarah's breath hitched. You know. I suspect, Dante whispered. But suspicion isn't proof. Tonight we get proof. The dining room was a cavern of mahogany and gold. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung over the table. Seated opposite Dante were Sergei and Viktor Volkov, men who looked like they were carved out of granite. Sarah stood in the shadows of the corner, the dogs lying flat on either side of her, blending into the darkness. She wore a simple black cocktail dress that allowed her to move freely, but she felt exposed. The dinner was tense. The conversation was in a mix of English and Russian, discussing shipping lanes and port authorities. Luca stood by the door, his face unreadable, his hand hovering near his holster. Sarah watched Luca. She noticed his eyes kept darting to the wine decanter on the sideboard. The 1982 Chateau Margaux. A toast! Sergei boomed, his voice thick with vodka and aggression. To new partnerships. Luca stepped forward to pour the wine. His hand shook, just a fraction. A micro-tremor. Sarah saw it. More importantly, Nero saw it. The dog let out a low, vibrating growl. It wasn't a growl of aggression. It was a growl of warning, the kind a dog gives when they smell sickness. Quiet, Dante commanded softly, looking at the dog. Luca poured Dante's glass, then Sergei's, then Victor's. To the future. Sergei raised his glass. Dante lifted the crystal goblet. The ruby liquid swirled. Sarah's heart hammered. She remembered the specific treat she saw in Luca's hand days ago, a brand used to mask the scent of bitter almonds, cyanide, or perhaps ricin. Dogs could smell chemical changes in the air that humans couldn't even register. Nero wasn't growling at Luca. He was growling at the chemical scent radiating from the glass. "Don't drink it!" Sarah screamed. She didn't wait for permission. She sprinted across the room. "What the—" Sergei stood up, reaching for his gun. Dante froze, the glass inches from his lips. Sarah didn't tackle Dante. That would get her shot by the guards. Instead, she whistled, a sharp, descending tone. "A port!" "Fetch!" She pointed at the glass in Dante's hand. Nero lunged from the shadows. He didn't bite Dante. He jumped up, his massive paws hitting the table, and with surgical precision, he head-butted Dante's hand. The glass flew across the room, shattering against the stone fireplace. The expensive wine hissed as it hit the hot embers. Hiss. Not a steam hiss, a chemical hiss. The fire flared green for a split second. Silence descended on the room. Absolute, suffocating silence. Sergei looked at the green flame, then at his own glass. He slowly set it down. Dante looked at the shattered glass, then at Sarah, who was standing panting by the table, her hand on Nero's collar. Finally, he turned his gaze to Luca. "Luca," Dante said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Why did the fire turn green?" Luca's face crumbled. The mask of the loyal soldier fell away, revealing a terrified boy. "Boss, they have my sister, the Rossi family. They took my sister." Luca went for his gun. He was fast, but Brutus was faster. Before Luca could clear the holster, the second dog hit him from the blind side. The impact sounded like a car crash. Luca hit the floor screaming as Brutus clamped down on his forearm, crushing the radius and ulna instantly. "Call him off!" Luca shrieked, thrashing. "Call him off!" "Leave him," Dante commanded. Brutus held the arm, growling deep in his chest, waiting for the order to finish the job. Dante stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. He looked at the Russian brothers. "Gentlemen, it seems my domestic staff needs discipline. The wine was compromised. I suggest we switch to vodka." Sergei Volkov laughed, a deep, booming belly laugh. He clapped his hands. "I like you, Moretti, and I like the girl. She has, how do you say, balls." Dante looked at Sarah. There was no amusement in his eyes, only a burning intensity that made her knees weak. "Yes," Dante said softly. "She does." The aftermath of the dinner was efficient and brutal. The Russians left with a signed contract. Luca was dragged to the basement cells by the remaining loyal guards. Sarah sat on the floor of the library, her dress ruined, stroking Nero's head. Her hands were shaking. She had just orchestrated a mauling. She had saved a life. But at what cost? The doors opened. Dante walked in. He had discarded his jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the bandage on his shoulder. He carried 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Sarah. "Drink," he said. She took it and downed half in one burn. "Is he dead, Luca?" "Not yet," Dante said, sitting in the armchair opposite her. "He is talking. He confirmed what you suspected. He was working for the Rossis. Sophia put him up to it. She used his sister as leverage." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now," Dante said, leaning forward, "we go to war. The Rossis tried to kill me in my own home. They tried to poison my guests. If I don't retaliate tonight, I look weak. And if I look weak, I'm dead." "We?" Sarah asked. "You're the handler," Dante said. "I'm taking the dogs." "You can't handle them alone in a firefight," Sarah argued. "They track off your emotions. If you're angry, they'll be reckless. They need a grounding wire. That's me." Dante studied her. The adrenaline of the night had stripped away the social barriers between them. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. "You should run, Sarah," he whispered. "Take the money I gave you. Go to Canada. This life, it eats people." "I'm not leaving the dogs," Sarah whispered back. "And I'm not leaving you." The air between them crackled. For a moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. He leaned in, his eyes dropping to her lips. Then his radio crackled. "Boss, we're ready. The convoy is prepped." Dante pulled back, the mask of the Don sliding back into place. "Get changed. Tactical gear. We leave in 10 minutes." The target was a shipyard in the Jersey harbor. It was the Rossi family's main distribution hub for narcotics. Intelligence from Luca, extracted painfully, confirmed that Sophia and her father, Don Rossi, were there tonight overseeing a shipment. It was pouring rain again. The weather seemed to mourn for the violence that was about to happen. Sarah sat in the back of the armored SUV, dressed in black cargo pants and a Kevlar vest. Brutus and Nero wore their own gear, custom-fitted Kevlar vests with tracking beacons and handles. They looked like creatures from a nightmare. "The plan is simple," Dante briefed his team over the comms. "Team A hits the front gate. Team B takes the roof. I'm going in the side entrance with the dogs. We flush them out." "Why are we bringing the dogs to a gunfight?" one of the new guards asked skeptically. "Because," Dante said, checking the magazine of his assault rifle, "we aren't there to kill everyone. We're there to hunt. And these two don't miss a scent." The convoy went silent as they approached the docks. The towering cranes looked like skeletal fingers against the stormy sky. "Go." The night erupted. Team A breached the gate with C4. The explosion shook the ground. Dante kicked open the side door of the warehouse, Sarah right behind him. The warehouse was a maze of shipping containers, stacked 3 high. Gunfire echoed from the front, drawing the Rossi soldiers away. "Search!" Dante commanded the dogs. "Find Sophia." He held up a scarf. Sophia's scarf, recovered from the estate. Nero took a deep sniff. His tail went rigid. He took off silently down the center aisle, nose to the ground. They moved in a tactical formation. Dog, Dante, Sarah, dog. They were deep in the maze when the trap sprung. It wasn't soldiers. It was silence. Nero stopped. He whined. He backed up, pressing against Sarah's legs. "What is it?" Dante whispered. "Ambush," Sarah hissed. "Above us." Dante looked up just as the floodlights blinded them. "Drop the weapons, Moretti." Don Rossi's voice boomed from the catwalks above. Dozens of red laser dots appeared on Dante's chest. They were surrounded. Men stepped out from behind the containers on the ground level, weapons raised. Sophia stepped out onto the catwalk, looking down like a queen. "I told you, Dante. You should have married me. Now you die in a warehouse, like a rat." Dante didn't drop his rifle. He calculated the odds. They were 0. "Let the girl go," Dante shouted. "She's just staff." "She's the one who humiliated me," Sophia sneered. "She dies first. Shoot the dogs, then her, then him." "Wait," Sarah stepped forward, raising her hands. "Don't shoot the dogs. They're worth $500,000 each. They're purebred Sicilian Cane Corsos. You want to throw away money, Rossi?" Don Rossi hesitated. Greed was a powerful motivator. "Hold fire on the beasts." "Sarah, what are you doing?" Dante hissed without moving his lips. "Trust me," she whispered. Sarah looked up at the catwalk. She judged the distance. 20 feet up, metal stairs to the left. She looked at Brutus. She looked at Nero. She didn't use a voice command. She used a hand signal she had never shown Dante. A signal she invented in the backyard fighting ring when the cops showed up and the dogs needed to create chaos. She tapped her chest twice, then pointed at the sky. Chaos. Brutus didn't attack the men. He attacked the support beam of the nearest shelving unit. He clamped his jaws onto a hydraulic hose running along the side of the container lift and ripped it free. Hydraulic fluid sprayed everywhere at high pressure, blinding the 2 guards nearest them. "Now!" Sarah screamed. Dante opened fire. He took out the light above them, plunging the section into semi-darkness. "Kill them!" Rossi screamed. But the dogs were gone. They were low, fast shadows in the dark. Nero didn't go for the legs. He scrambled up the stacked wooden pallets like a cat, launching himself toward the stairs. Sarah grabbed Dante's vest and yanked him behind a steel container, just as bullets shredded the air where they had been standing. "The stairs!" Sarah yelled. "Nero is going for the high ground." "Cover fire!" Dante roared, leaning out and spraying bullets at the Rossi soldiers advancing on the ground. Sarah wasn't armed with a gun. She had a taser and a knife. A soldier rounded the corner, shotgun raised. Sarah didn't think. She dropped to her knees, sliding on the wet concrete, and jammed the taser into his groin. He folded. Above them, a scream echoed that curdled the blood. Sophia! Nero had made it to the catwalk. "No! Get away! Daddy!" Sophia shrieked. "Nero, guard!" Sarah screamed at the top of her lungs, hoping the dog could hear her over the gunfire. If Nero killed Sophia, the police heat would be unbearable. If he held her hostage, they had a bargaining chip. The screaming stopped, replaced by a terrified sobbing. "Hold fire! Hold fire!" Don Rossi shouted. "The beast has my daughter!" Silence fell over the warehouse again, broken only by the sound of rain on the metal roof and Sophia's whimpering. On the catwalk, illuminated by a flickering emergency light, a tableau of horror. Nero had Sophia pinned to the grate. His massive paws were on her shoulders, and his open jaws were clamped loosely around her throat. He wasn't biting down, he was holding her. One twitch, and her jugular would be gone. "You move," Dante called out from behind the container, "and she dies." Don Rossi stood frozen on the other side of the catwalk, his gun useless. "You win, Moretti," Rossi spat. "Let her go. We walk away." "You don't walk away," Dante said, stepping out into the open, his rifle trained on Rossi. "You surrender. The port is mine. The territory is mine. And you retire. Tonight." "And if I say no?" "Sarah," Dante said calmly. Sarah looked up at her dog. She had the power of life and death in a single syllable. "Don't make me do it," Sarah whispered to the air. Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open behind them. Blue and red lights flooded the interior. "FBI, drop your weapons!" It wasn't a rescue, it was a raid. And Dante and Sarah were trapped in the middle of a gang war with the feds closing in on both sides. "We have to go," Dante said, grabbing Sarah's arm. "The back exit, the water. We can't leave the dogs," Sarah cried. "Whistle," Dante ordered. "If they are as good as you say, they'll follow." Sarah put 2 fingers to her mouth and blew the sharpest, loudest whistle of her life. On the catwalk, Nero released Sophia instantly. He and Brutus, who had been guarding the flank, leaped from the second story, a 20-foot drop, landing on the tops of the shipping containers and bounding toward Sarah. "Run!" Dante and Sarah sprinted toward the loading bay doors that opened to the black water of the harbor. The FBI agents were breaching the main floor. Rossi was shouting. Bullets whizzed past their heads. They reached the edge of the pier. There was no boat, just black, freezing water and a drop of 15 feet. "Jump!" Dante yelled. He grabbed her hand. The dogs didn't hesitate. They launched themselves into the void. Sarah and Dante followed, plunging into the icy Atlantic, just as the warehouse exploded behind them, a rigged charge from the Rossi failsafe. The cold hit Sarah like a hammer. She went under, the darkness swallowing her whole. She didn't know which way was up. Then she felt something grab the back of her vest. Teeth. Strong, gentle teeth. Nero was dragging her to the surface. The icy water of the harbor should have killed them, but the dogs wouldn't allow it. Brutus and Nero became living life rafts, towing Dante and Sarah through the black, oil-slicked currents until they reached the pilings of an old, rotted pier 200 yards downstream. A stealth boat, piloted by Dante's last remaining ghost, a man known only as the Bishop, was waiting in the shadows. The world believed Dante Moretti and his mystery woman died in the warehouse explosion that night. The news cycle ran the story for a week, showing the charred ruins and speculating on the power vacuum left in the underworld. Sophia Rossi tried to claim the throne, but without the respect of the families, she was quickly dismantled by the commission. 6 months later, on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the Amalfi coast in Italy, a woman in a white silk dress sat reading a book. She didn't look like a waitress from Arizona anymore. She looked like royalty. Dante walked out onto the terrace, placing 2 espressos on the table. He was healed, though the scars on his shoulder would remain forever. He wore linen and sunglasses, the picture of a retired businessman, but the phone on the table, buzzing with encrypted messages from New York, told a different story. He wasn't retired. He was just invisible. "The Commission accepted the terms," Dante said, sitting down. "They know we're alive. They know we have the files Luca stole. They won't touch us." Sarah closed her book. "And Sophia?" "Federal prison. RICO charges. She'll be old before she sees the sky again." Brutus and Nero trotted up from the garden, their coats gleaming in the Italian sun. They didn't look like monsters here. They looked like guardians. Nero rested his heavy head on Sarah's knee, letting out a contented sigh. Dante watched them, a small smile playing on his lips. "You know, my men still talk about you. The waitress who tamed the beasts with a hand wave. They call you the sorceress." Sarah smiled, reaching down to scratch Nero behind the ears. She looked at Dante, her eyes soft but fierce. She extended her hand across the table, palm up, fingers relaxed, the same gesture she had used in the velvet room. "I didn't tame them, Dante," she whispered. "I just understood them. Everyone else saw killers. I saw family." Dante placed his hand in hers, interlacing their fingers. "Then I suppose I'm the lucky one, because you saw the same thing in me." The beasts at their feet closed their eyes, finally at peace, guarding the only two people in the world who mattered. What a ride. From a trembling waitress in a diner to the queen of the underworld living in Italy, Sarah's journey proves that sometimes the scariest beasts just need the right touch. It wasn't about dominance or force. It was about empathy and courage. Sarah saw the fear behind the aggression in Nero, and that single moment of understanding saved her life. And Dante's. If you loved this intense Mafia romance and the incredible loyalty of Brutus and Nero, please give this video a massive thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Comment below. If you were in Sarah's shoes at the restaurant, would you have run away, or would you have tried to calm the dogs? I want to know what you would do. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.